Hi, it's Jeff. I've got another one of these videos I'm going to add into my series on working with Americans, and I'm going to call this the cruelty factor. There was a specific post on LinkedIn that was talking about the healthcare industry and the whole debate of whether or not it should be paid. And I've got a whole another video about that right here. This is going to just follow that video. So I'm not going to re-explain that, but it's going to follow that one. So I just want to make sure the transition's here. And so this whole thing is healthcare as a commodity or as a necessity. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add another thing, because there was a specific a post on LinkedIn about this debate. And the person said that it all came down to it's a cruelty factor. There was kind of a sense of cruelty that it's a constrained thing, okay, and that you will pay and you won't get things because of certain factors. And I think it's really important to link that to one of the other cultural traits that I talk in this video series about, at least for the Americans, but I talk it for all of them, all the different cultures I'm working about. The restrained versus indulgent cultures, right? Or the fact that this dominant traits of ethnic national cultures. And so this comes from a restrained type culture and not an indulgent culture, right? So I'm going to say that here. So this comes from this is the one in the Hofstede and all 6 national traits. And if you look at it from a restrained culture, you're restrained, right? You're constrained or restrained. And it also, you're going to see some cultures are going to deal with this when you look at Pascal Baudry, and when he's talking about the legal kind of institutional, how different cultures are set up institutionally from a legal point of view, and how they see the law applied. And you're going to have some, he had some really, I think, really things that were really interesting here, because he was comparing the French with the Americans. And here, and I'm going to take it the American one. He said that the Americans see, and this goes back to common law to England, right? So he says that it's really important to understand that the way that the laws are set up is that you are as responsible as an individual, right? It's all based on you and your responsibility. We said when you compare it to the French culture, French law is set up is that it's a responsibility of a collective cultural thing. And that you are not as responsible as an individual. You're supposed to do it just because you're not supposed to be ignorant of the thing, but that no one will apply it, right? Because it doesn't apply at an individual level necessary. So that's why people can, have dog crap all over the street because they're not feeling it applies to them, right? Or they can smoke even though they're at a place where they're not supposed to be smoking, because they're not going to have people coming and actually applying it to them and saying, you need to stop doing this now. It's not. And he says this is where it's already, you can see signs in France, and you can see, but it's never applied because there's no police to actually fine you, right? But he says in like American culture, there's someone to fine you, right? They're going to fine you and make you pay for it. So you're responsible at an individual level. And I think this is really important here to talk about this factor of. So I've given a couple of these different references from Hofstede and all, and from Pascal Baudry, to kind of set the scene of, now what do you talk about the cruelty factor? And the cruelty factor, I mean, some of this comes from if I want to apply it to America, because I want to apply it to the United States here, and I want to kind of customize this and personalize this to America, because that's the culture I'm talking about right here. With the whole history of the industrial, well, the whole history of the colonies, getting across in those boats and surviving the trip was already a big thing, right? I mean, we always talk about the slave trade and the slaves that actually survived, but for the people that came across that were other immigrants, right? The non-slave trade ones, right? So those came for economic, exile, or for religious exile, or for some other type of exile, from Europe in general. They survived the boat trip too, right? Some did not. So we have to actually, and I do talk about this later or somewhere else in this video series, this book about that. and how the rebels, go watch that part about it specifically. But they survived the. So they're going to be very, they're going to be very, they're going to be very, perseverant to survive. And then you add that to the Industrial Revolution, where it was survival of the fittest, the survival of the fittest, right? So add that now to this whole thing of the work ethic of if you don't work, you don't eat, right? And then add that also to the survival of the fittest, and that's why you see dog eat dog, and you're going to see each one's out for their own interest in themselves. It's very individualistic, and that comes out the whole individualistic culture, which I've already seen this video book as well, where I compare that to collective cultures, or Asian cultures or whatever, or African cultures in general. So this cruelty factor comes that you need to be a self-made man, right? Or a self-made person, we should say, if we want to be inclusive here. But the whole thing is that you need to establish yourself by merit, and you're not getting it because you're a human being. You're not getting it. It's not granted, right? You have to earn this. You have to earn this right to be able to have health care, right? Rather than it being a necessary or necessity that the government's going to give to you. And I think this is really key. As you begin to look at and how the cruelty factor, what this person talked about the cruelty factor, I'm just kind of making a statement on that. I'm kind of answer that about how I see this could link in. I'm not saying that I believe it's always a cruelty factor, but it's something interesting. I think it's a really interesting point, and it could be one way of explaining this. Not the only way, but I think it's one flavor way to explain this. And so this whole cruelty factor comes from the restrained and constrained view too. It needs to be painful, right? It needs to be difficult. Whereas for the French, if we want to take the other side of the thing, it's an indulgent culture where it needs to be fun, right? Or it has to be a pleasure, right? I think this is really key to understand between the cultures and how these things are worked on. So here again, this cruelty factor fits into that constrained or restrained cultural point of view, that dimension that's named by Hofstede and all. And I think you've gotten the point here. I think what you've mentioned in your post, or your comment to this post, is really relevant. And I think it's something that even as I think about the way I'll sometimes say things, and I say something to my sons too. It's sometimes I'll point out that it needs to be difficult, right? It needs to be hard. You've got to work for it. You've got to merit it. You've got to earn it by merit. Whether it's not just something that's given and it's come to you, right? And I think that these are, and this goes against the grain in French culture. Sometimes it just doesn't fit it, and they can struggle with that from time to time. But there's not one way is right or one way is wrong. It's just it's going to fit more within those that mentality versus another. But my kids are growing up with kind of a dual view of things, and I've lived hybrid for a long time, in France too. So, but there are some things I'm constantly thinking about how this fits into our worldviews. And this is a really important thing. So I think the cruelty factor is something to consider, and it's against the indulgence part. I struggle personally with the whole indulgence point of view when it's very much that, right? When it's focused on that entirely, and it can be overly done in France because of vacation. Just talking about vacation times all the time and having meals all the time. It's all the talk about, right? To the point where there's no constraint, right? But there are other cultures that do like to live on the constraint part, which can be the German culture a bit more, right? Or even Japanese culture can be much more too, right? But I think here is. how the cruelty factor applies to the United States for health care. It's the whole thing is, you need to work for it, and if you don't work for it, you won't get it. And too bad if you don't have it, right? You're just going to die, right? You don't have it, too bad. You didn't have money to earn to pay for that, too bad. Is this right or wrong? I don't think we can actually say it's right or wrong. I'm saying it comes from history. It comes from a point of view. It comes from an ethic of work that is not always the best thing, right? It comes from that whole work ethic. You got to work hard and you got to work to eat, and which is not bad. But when it gets to the point where you can't have it because you didn't make the money for it, because you don't have enough to make the money to be able to do it, that's another point of view. And I'll finish up here with a kind of a side statement here, kind of another anecdote here, with a friend that got a hybrid car, right, in France, and the funny thing was, the statement was, France is trying to promote electric vehicles, right, EVs, by saying that you can have, a tax write-off, right, or a tax break on this, tax deduction. However, you can only get that if you fit into certain categories, which means that your income is under a certain level, and that you meet certain requirements on the type of car that you buy, and that in certain conditions about that car. And it needs to be a certain type of electric vehicle, because there are lots of different types of electric vehicles, right? There's different types of hybrids, right? There's different, and how they charge and all that stuff. And I don't want to go all these details here, but there are different types. I'm not even an expert on this, right? But far from it. But the funny statement that my friend said to me here was that if you can only get that tax write-off if you fit into the right category with the right type of car, that's the right type of electric car that's not a lower category car, kind of a hybrid. It needs to be a full electric vehicle. And you can't earn a certain amount of income. You need to be under a certain tax, in a certain tax bracket of earning income. But at the same time, the cars in which that you need to buy, electric vehicles that cost a lot of money, right? They cost 30 grand. So the vehicle itself costs more than you make a year. And so so that person cannot get that vehicle, purchase it, so it can't get the tax write-off, and it's not applicable to get the tax deduction because they don't meet the constraints. And so this is the whole, only certain few people can fit into that little specific tax bracket, plus getting the car and making that decision, and and all that. And this is where all these constraints come into point of view, and really you can't. Whereas the whole idea would be to have, I don't want to say indulgence, but be able to get it, and then to be able to, and you're going to get it as a. And so is this a benefit or necessity, right? Or is this a? And I think these are kind of examples that we have to think about. Because we're getting some noise here. All these people are excited out here, right here. These are kind of examples that as we begin to move on in the world, and we have things will come up like healthcare, education, climate control. Again, the electrical car is all about climate control and sustainability, right? And these are things that we have to kind of think about how they fit into our worldview of whether we are, how we see the world with the constraint versus indulgence thing, and with other factors. So all this is really, I think that what we all need to do is, and here we're coming back to the whole cruelty thing, right? These are again, how do we fit in? How do we view the world? How do we view these things I don't want to say pessimistic or optimistic or just a realistic, but how do we see the world in which we see ourselves as, as getting something out of life? And we see a big difference in the history. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people here in the past few days or the past few months, saying that the whole generation of kids today, they don't want to work, right? They want to spend their time on their phones. They sit there and they expect to have it, right? I'm not saying that all kids are like that, but there's enough of kids that have that. Whereas there was an earlier past generations where you got to work hard, right, to get you one. But I think this is how we're getting, where everything is becoming. We get everything easily, right? It's you can buy devices. You can definitely everybody can you can buy devices. I get a whole bunch of devices you can't even see right here, but I got a whole 3 bags of stuff, right, that I've got to be able to come this all my equipment to do these things and do these videos and stuff, and sometimes have the right cables, the right this and the right that, and the right camera, the right something, the right microphone and everything, in the right environment with the right headset, right? So, but we have all these things that we can have all the time, and these are first world problems, and this is where that whole indulgence and thing comes into play. And in some cultures, which we've seen and have talked about in some other posts recently too. Some cultures that are poor, really, really poor, and really, really devastated countries where they're dictators, there's no choice. You obey or you die, right? You are killed. It can happen. It does happen. And a lot of this comes into play of where you grew up and how you view oppression, how you view repression, oppression, and sometimes it's a way of life. It's just the way it is. But in some other cultures, we see this as bad, right? We see this as wrong. But in other cultures, it's how it is every day. It's just how life is. I'm not saying we have to accept that. I'm not saying that it is good. I'm saying that it is as it is. And some people will come from those cultures, and they'll be glad to be able to come to a culture where they don't have that as much. But does that mean that that's always bad? That the oppression is always bad? Well, no, maybe it has set some thinking to be able, that you're not going to have as much, or you're not going to have to live with as much, or you're not going to have to always get everything you want, right? Money doesn't always grow on trees, right? And so these are values that we all deal with our kids, right? We have to think about. So, take all this with a grain of salt. I'm extemporaneous thinking as I'm going through and making these videos and pulling a few anecdotes and trying to see how these pieces of the puzzle kind of fit together about these different topics. But at least those are some of my thoughts about the cruelty factor that was brought up in one of these posts on LinkedIn. So I didn't have the exact name and stuff. I'm going to go to post it there. But some of these times I just see it and I can't remember the name of the person. So I actually have to go find the link to actually post this back up there. But hopefully this will answer, at least it will give some thoughts. It's all food for thought. It's for dialoguing, it's for discussing and debating and kind of, all those things. So those are the thoughts for today on that topic.